Welcome to this week's edition of Freedom and Prosperity Radio, the weekly radio news magazine that we put together here at the Virginia Institute for Public Policy. You can find us online at tertiumquids.org, and we have a YouTube channel where we keep archives of all of these programs. If you say, there was something he said a couple of months back, you can look it up at YouTube and then Freedom and Prosperity Radio. Great program here as we head into the Christmas season. We realize that the General Assembly will be hard on the heels of that as January comes in. And our first guest this week has been on plenty of times before, Executive Director of OneVirginia2021, Brian Cannon. We're going to talk about one of the issues that everyone was a front burner issue until then the Democratic Party won the General Assembly majority, and we're starting to see where redistricting sits now. Brian, Merry Christmas. Welcome to the program. How are you doing, sir?
Merry Christmas, Joe. Thank you for having me on again. Doing well. My wife and I are actually expecting a baby girl in the coming weeks. So it's a very joyous season for us.
Mazel tov. That is great. And is this your first child, or?
It'll be our second. We've got a 5-year-old son who's very excited to be a big brother.
That's the key right there, is the excited part. And, if you have that family unit, man, there is nothing better. I'm on the high side of my youngest is 19 now, so bless you for it and enjoy it for everything.
That's fun.
Redistricting was a hot topic, and then almost predictably, as soon as the folks like Dick Saslow and Eileen Fillerkorn win a majority in the House, it seems to have been dropped from everybody's hot potato list. So catch us up on where it is, why it seems like the Democratic Party in Virginia was all for redistricting until they won the majority in the House and Senate.
Yeah, it's funny. The situational ethics are starting to show in some politicians here. So here's the good news: is that we've got Ralph Northam has come out in support of the amendment. Tim Kaine has come out in support of the amendment, and even Dick Saslow has come out in support of the amendment. But we're not hearing as much from the incoming speaker about this. That being said, she's not talking about a lot of policies, but we're certainly hearing from members of her caucus that are saying all of a sudden the deal they voted for in February, that they were touting on the campaign trail this summer and fall, is all of a sudden maybe not good enough for them.
Now, so much of this, it's not just about the House and Senate of Virginia, but this will transcend into the congressional redistricting once we're done with the census in 2020. So it's not like the issue goes away.
Yeah. Oh, exactly. This is a big deal for Virginia, and even broader. There are other states that are looking for this kind of hybrid approach because you can't always get what Michigan or Colorado or California got through southern states, through mid-Atlantic states. They're looking at us and saying, are Dems going to really follow through on their promise of fair redistricting?
Well, and at the end of it, and I know you and I have had this conversation in the esoterica, I feel like there's a sweet spot, maybe not at a full mathematical matchup, but with 3 times as many Virginians as we had 100 years ago, I almost wonder if it's just not even mathematically feasible to draw compact and contiguous districts anymore with the same number of House and Senate members. And I know nobody ever wants to give up political power, but where do we stand with the judge's rulings, with the plan that's been put forth, with the commission and how it would be constructed, the citizen members? Because I think we need to re-prime the pump a little bit for what will be coming if this does get through the General Assembly.
Yeah. No, Joe, it's important. So what's there is a 16-member commission that will draw the maps. Half of that commission, 8 members, will be from the legislature, 4 senators and 4 members of the House of Delegates, evenly divided by party. And then you get 8 citizens, also evenly divided by party. And you need to get 6 votes of each block of 8 to pass a map. So you need 6 legislators and 6 citizens to sign on to something and pass the map. It would then go to the legislature for a binding up or down vote where they could not amend the maps, which is critical to this, because if you let them amend it, they'll just do it the old-fashioned way, right?
Yep.
So it amends the maps, and then there we go. There's the other big component in here is there's huge transparency provisions that we've never had before. I mean, this is just a process that has taken, not only historically, but even recently, taken place in the proverbial smoky back room of politics, and this would take it out of there for the first time in our history. So what we have on the table is a chance for citizens to be at the table with a veto over the map and an equal say over the maps for the first time ever. We have added protections for minority communities built into the amendment, which is good given our recent and long history of racial gerrymandering. And we have transparency provisions that are going to make us all able to be good watchdogs of our own state government.
We talk about the racial side of it. Brian Cannon is on with us from OneVirginia2021 because that is really the goal. It is not, we won the majority in 2020. I guess, we can drop the ball on it. And I guess that's a point of order, is to make sure that those like Sally Hudson, new member, replacing David Toscano in the House of Delegates, that they are reminded or educated on the importance of some of this, and it's not just politics as usual. But you talked about the gerrymandering by race, and I know the Voting Rights Act was built around the idea of not splitting up communities of color, so that I guess what had been happening after Reconstruction is there'd be a black community and half of it would be in this district and half of it would be in that district, and therefore giving it no real community power to vote together. But then we come to the other end of it, and we see it become vote packing. So how do you find a sweet spot in between splitting up communities of like interest and district packing?
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of, those are the two extremes there, and the good news is that there's a lot in the middle. Drawing fair maps is actually not that hard. Not that there's no perfect map, of course. There's no perfect set of districts, but drawing fair maps isn't that hard. What makes it complicated is if you are trying to make sure somebody gets reelected or not in the process, right? Yeah. That's when it gets really dicey. That's why they have to go through neighborhoods and carve out individual homes and make sure to put in somebody's big donor into their district or whatever. Like, that's the stuff that's complicated. And that's when they start really carving up minority communities. Whereas if you just kept communities together, forget race or not, if you just kept communities together, you would see a lot better looking districts, but looking isn't all that matters, right? But they would look better. And you would see a lot more in that sweet spot between either cracking the African-American communities, which is traditionally what's happened, or packing them, which is more recently what's happened. You find that sweet spot would actually happen. We are not as divided as our politics may seem, and we are not as geographically divided as some people might tell you otherwise. We actually, I mean, there certainly are pockets where it's all, an enclave of one race or culture, but mostly we're pretty kind of homogenized, which is probably a really good thing.
Well, you look at the president's popularity in the African-American community cresting 35%, which is 3 times what it usually is for a Republican, perhaps even at a high watermark. And then you read Slate Magazine's piece after the General Assembly election about how the Democratic Party is trying to woo over the suburban housewife in lieu of, I guess, I don't know. Let me bring up the subject of political party. Is this a gateway, and I'm using that term with tongue-in-cheek, towards party registration in Virginia? I think Virginians sort of hold the banner of, we don't register by party here in Virginia, not like those northeastern states or anything like that. But if we're going to guarantee that there be equal representation of Republicans and Democrats on the redistricting and the district drawing commission, then I guess at some point we're going to have to discuss whether or not we do party registrations.
Oh, I hope not, Joe. I'm personally, I mean, One Virginia as an organization didn't have an opinion about it, but personally I think party registration is a horrible idea. I love the fact that Virginia does not do that for a whole host of reasons. But the way the commission works, because the question is, well, how do you find out the citizens are Republicans or Democrats? to put them on the commission to begin with, right? That is important. We don't want them to. We're not trying to find people that are party hacks, but we're also not trying to find people that actually won't represent an interest either. So here's how the amendment works. The amendment says that the 4 legislative leaders, so the Senate President Pro Tem, who will be Senator Louise Lucas, and the Senate Minority Leader, who is Tommy Norman, and then the Speaker of the House, and then the Minority Leader in the House, so Eileen Filler-Corn and Todd Gilbert, each get to submit a list of 16 eligible candidates. We've got some thoughts on what eligibility should be, right? Not a former legislator, not a big donor, that kind of stuff. And they each submit a list of 16 candidates. That's a total pool of 64 people at least. They could certainly submit more, and we would like them to, and then adopt like a jury strike method to pull out the ringers. But nonetheless, the amendment just says at least 16, so that's 64 people, and then 5 retired circuit court judges who are also bound. They're all picked by the legislative leaders, and then those 4 people pick a 5th judge to complete the task with them. Basically, you're asking those folks to the equivalent of sitting a jury, which is exactly what those state trial court judges did in their careers. Right. So they take that list of 64, they winnow it down to 8, and you take 2 from each list of 16. And that's how you know that, I don't think that the new Speaker of the House would recommend 16 people who weren't all Democrats, right? So we want to put some guardrails on kind of what they make sure they're not a party hacker or whatever, employee of or a big donor. But generally speaking, you could trust them to do that, and that would absolve us of the party registration problem.
And you know me and Brian, I've been the MC of events for OneVirginia2021, and I always know I'm over the target when I'm taking flack for it. And I think the last time I was at one, I had an amazing afternoon talking with George Allen for one good segment and Linda Perriello for another big segment. Like, how does the same person have? It's because we're people, like you said. We're a whole lot more alike than we're different. Let me bring up, though, the subject that I think, bothers me is still at this point, and I don't know if it addresses it in the constitutional amendment. When Virginia was founded, there were no Republicans and Democrats, and there may be a day where there are no Republicans and Democrats. Are there mechanisms within this? If, let's say, that blessed 30% of Virginia that always polls as independent whenever there's an electoral poll, all of a sudden band together and decide, you know what, we're all libertarians, and we get half a dozen libertarians elected to the next General Assembly. Is there a mechanism that takes that into account?
Yes. Okay, so that's a really good point, Joe. In the amendment itself, we're not saying that it doesn't say Republicans shall appoint and Democrats shall appoint. It just says the majority and next majority party in the legislature. So if the Libertarians surge to number 2, then they would be the next majority party, and they would have that. So so we're not locking in our political system any more than it already is, though the system does inherently acknowledge we're in a kind of a 2-party system.
And I must confess, I was just reading media coverage of it, and my brothers and sisters in the media will just go to the simplest Republican v. Democrat. It's like Mad Magazine Spy v. Spy that at the end of it. So have you discussed this with some of the newer members, the ones that haven't been in the General Assembly? We've got a lot of freshmen, fresh faces, and get their feel for this, because you're going to have to pass the whole thing again before it comes to us as voters.
Yes. The good news is that the folks that have been around for a while are the ones that are troubling, but there are a lot of newer, fresher faces in the legislature, probably than there have been in decades. And all of those people ran on redistricting reform. Almost all of them have said publicly that they support the amendment's passage again. And some of them are some of our best supporters. Sally Hudson, the new delegate from Charlottesville, before she was elected, before she was even running, we would sit in the back row of Privileges and Elections in the House of Delegates, the Privileges Elections Committee, and she had some electoral reforms. She's big on ranked choice voting. Of course, I was working on redistricting reform back then too. And we would just, bond together over, here's all the ways we can improve our democracy in genuine ways that aren't going to hurt one party or another. And we just watch the Republicans in the House kill our bills. So we've been friends for a while, and she's been a strong supporter of this for well before she was even contemplating running. So Sally Hudson's a great example. Another strong supporter is Josh Cole. He's going to be the new delegate from Fredericksburg. So he will take Bob Thomas's place, and Bob Thomas lost in the primary to Paul Mildy. Anyway, Josh Cole is from one of the ground zeros of split precincts, misassigned voters, just a really unfortunate election administration that's happened in Fredericksburg, not just 2 years ago, but also this past November. Josh knows we got to do something different, and he's been vocal in his support of the amendment. So I feel pretty good about the new ones. It's the folks that have been in for a while that I've got my eye on.
Brian Cannon, Executive Director of OneVirginia2021. I want to ask this, and it's not because I'm against the idea. I want the districts to be simpler, and you know me. I want there to be more districts, honestly. But the premise that the districts were drawn to protect the incumbents, which is often the standard by which redistricting is first promoted, didn't the last two General Assembly elections sort of blow up that premise? And again, I'm not saying it to say play gotcha with it, but the idea that, well, the Republicans had drawn all the districts to protect themselves, well, they just got ousted. Now, maybe it's because they got a little casual with the idea that they had the seat guaranteed to them or anything like that, which, again, is Adam Smith's invisible hand saying, at your peril, think that. But we have a huge swing from a huge Republican majority to a fairly large Democrat majority, especially in the House. Where do you take that?
Yeah, so that's a good point, and you're right. I would say that oftentimes gerrymandered districts have a shelf life, and the number one reason they have a shelf life is because people move. So just over the course of from 2011, when the districts were originally drawn, to now, the original Dave Albo district in Springfield looks a whole lot different over the last 8-9 years than it did when it was first drawn. So there's that element to it. And I also think, in 2017, I do think you hit the nail on the head there, Joe. I think Republicans were caught napping. I thought they didn't know how big the blue wave was going to be, and it was a historic, once in a multi-generational tsunami of a blue wave. And I think what's important to know, though, is that even with that 10-point wave, the Democrats still did not take back the House of Delegates. You would think if one party gets 10 points up on the other party, that they would have 10 more seats than the other party, or something, maybe only 7, but you think they would have a lot more.
Oh, yeah.
And it didn't happen. And the redraw, this past election, we had court-drawn districts, and I think a lot of the Democrats benefited from that. Basically, just the pendulum was swinging kind of back to the middle, and so a little bit of it, the districts get stale. A little bit of it is that there's been such an unprecedented blue wave, and then there was the court-ordered redistricting. I think a little bit of A, B, and C are all contributing there.
Hey, last one for you, Brian, and thank you again. I really appreciate your time. OneVirginia2021, it is a good topic, and it is an important thing because I think we have suffered under these issues one wave or another. As you mentioned, the pendulum swinging one way or another. A lot of the listeners worry that Northern Virginia, what they always had called the Golden Crescent, from Northern Virginia through Richmond down to Hampton Roads, was getting stronger and stronger, more and more powerful because of population density. You'll have more delegates in a small area because of population density, therefore overwhelming one party or another. Is there a way outside of perhaps coming up with a way to get more districts, more representatives out there that you can fight that, or is that just the nature of demographics and people move in from northern states, southern states move north, and that kind of thing?
Yeah, I mean, it wasn't that long ago in our history in Virginia where the opposite was true, where Northern Virginia and other places were way underrepresented, and the folks in Southwest and South Side were way overrepresented. So I think that goes back and forth. Here's what I think: if you stop the gerrymandering that enables a lot of that power that naturally exists because of where people choose to live, but if you take that power out of it, it doesn't put that problem on steroids,
Mm-hmm.
right? So we're not extra packing, Northern Virginia versus screwing over folks in South Side, Southwest. But I think the other point, you and I talked about this before, is that we should probably raise the number of people in the legislature itself so that we have more members, so that more people could be closer to their members and actually, know the person who represents them in the state Senate or the state House. I mean, some of those districts on the South Side and Southwest Virginia, I mean, they're as big as some small states in New England.
I know, exactly. Well, as soon as this is done, Brian, I'm hiring you for this campaign because I really feel like, both at the House, at the Washington level and at the State House level, I think it is a common thread amongst Democrats and Republicans that they feel that their representatives don't listen to them, they don't hear their issues, and perhaps that's just because they're, what do they say? As soon as you're about to have a second family member, that 5-year-old's attention is about to be cut in half. So as long as he's on board with it, it's a great ride. But it's 800,000 people in a congressional district. It makes it tough to get the ear of your congressperson or get a compact and contiguous district. Last one, then, do you expect this to pass the General Assembly? And then what does the campaign look like as it comes to the vote in, I guess it would be 2020?
Yeah, so if we get it to the voters, I think it passes. The Watson Center just released a poll this week where they tested a question similar to what our amendment says, basically asking folks if they approve the amendment or not. And it came back with 75 in favor and 15 opposed. 70% in favor, 15 opposed. I mean, that's just a pretty lopsided victory. I don't think we'll get quite 70% at the ballot box, but I do think we'll get there. The hurdle is really getting it through the legislature. And I'm particularly got my eye on the House Democrats. And I think it would be a real mistake if they would vote for this just a handful of months ago and then get in power and all of a sudden say that's not good enough. And I know we'll lose some, but I'm cautiously optimistic, Joe, that this will get through and it will be the most comprehensive redistricting reform to ever get through a state legislature in our country's history, and we'll all have something to cheers about in the new year.
Well, and certainly from your standpoint, the fact that there's such a small don't know factor in that poll question is, to the efforts of OneVirginia2021, because that's the kind of inside baseball question that usually gets, 10% in favor, 10% against, and 80% don't know. And you've really educated Virginia on this. Plus, we like this kind of stuff. I think as a state, we geek out on this kind of stuff anyway, Brian.
That's right. I found all the nerds in Virginia, that's for sure.
Well, thank you for your visit this week on Freedom and Prosperity Radio, and we will continue this. And as soon as this is done, I'm putting you on the board of directors for the expansion of the General Assembly.
Let's do it, Joe. Thank you for having me.
You're very welcome. Coming up next, Scott Preverett. He is the chief editor with Gun Rights Watch. What do you imagine we'll be talking about? Yes, we'll also be talking about something that's coming up in the General Assembly. This one seems to be all-consuming. And Second Amendment, the sanctuary, the governor's plans, all coming up next on Freedom and Prosperity Radio.